Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Alexis Batulis with Columbus, and today we have a special presentation for you on Management Reporter tips and tricks. We started the call by putting everyone on mute, so if you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the question box on the upper right-hand side of the screen to ask any questions that may come up during our session. At the end, we'll have time for a Q&A with our presenter. Finally, we are recording the session and we'll be sending a link to all attendees within an hour after this webcast, along with a short 3-question survey. And now I'm excited to introduce your presenter today, Annette Brown. Annette is a senior GP implementation consultant here at Columbus. Annette Brown has over 20 years of experience implementing software and creating financial statements in Management Reporter and engaging customers in chart of account process reviews. So without further ado, Annette, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited that you're all here. Like Alexa said, my name is Annette Brown, and I am actually the implementation consultant over at Columbus. And I have roughly 40 tips that I'm going to try and squeak out here in 45 minutes. Anybody that's been to any of my other sessions knows that I like to yibber yabber. So I'm going to do my best to try and get these through. And because I have so much content for you, I'm not going to be stopping in between for breaks or anything. We'll just cover, or questions, we'll just cover those at the end. If I don't get to the questions at the end, I promise we will address those. If you put them in the chat window, we will make sure you get an answer for those after the fact, even if I can't get them addressed at the end, but I'm going to do my best. So everything is documented in a slide as we're going through this presentation. So if you would like a copy of that, at the end of the presentation, there'll be contact information that you guys can reach out and get the PDF version of all of these tips. So half the battle with any software is just knowing whether it's possible or not. That's just as important. So I like to point out the limitations as we discuss as we're going through these so that we can actually discuss the right tool for the job. Just like when you're using power tools, you need to use the right tool. We need to use the right tool when we're doing reporting as well. So I like Management Reporter. It's a great tool for creating financial statements because it was kind of designed with the end user in mind, right? The accountant. That most accountants aren't developers. You don't have to be a developer to be able to create your reports. With that flexibility comes limitations as well, meaning you can only pull things from, the general ledger. So when you're doing reporting, obviously reports, very analytical reports, sometimes you need to pull information from other sources, and that would require different tools. For example, being able to do things with Power BI or maybe SSRS reports really helps in being able to get that full view, being able to get those graphical types of reports that you can drill into. So, knowing what kind of information that you like to be able to get into reports, will help you determine what kind of tool you actually want to use. And we can definitely help with those processes and coming up with that. So if you've got additional needs for reporting that might go beyond general ledger requirements, please let us know, because we would be happy to do presentations or talk to you further about doing, those kinds of things as well. Today is going to be obviously covering Management Reporter. Some of these tips are going to just be quick how-tos. Some of them I'll discuss in a little bit more detail, but if you have further questions on some of that kind of information, put it in the chat window as we're going, and I'll try and address it at the end. Or if you think it's something that you need to be able to discuss more in depth, let us know, and I would be happy to schedule one-on-one time, to be able to address some of those things as well. So without further ado, let's kind of talk about what we're going to go over today. I got, like I said, 40 tips, and I broke them down into cute little headings. 1 + 1 = 2, meaning we're going to talk about formulas. Cool columns, things that you can do to make your columns work more efficiently, things that you might not have thought you could do with them. We're going to talk about what you can do with rows and maybe adding some things into the rows to make them do things that you might not have thought about before. Keeping it clean, additional tips with the World Wide Web viewer, making it mine, head to toe, meaning let's look at your headers and footers of your reports and what you can make them do automatically. The need for speed, all right, so when you're going through and you're working on your reports and you're editing reports, how can you do things more efficiently, more effectively? I got a hodgepodge, a couple things in there, and some glamour shots, like what can we do to make these reports look cool, okay? So the first grouping is going to be the formulas. We're going to talk about using a CBR format code to be able to create percentage calculations, the use of @unit in a row to be able to do calculations, in conjunction with some non-printing columns, and then a periods function. So some of these tips, when I'm going through this section, I'm actually going to combine them together so that you can see them used in conjunction with each other and maybe get you thinking about how you can do things a little different, or just to give you inspiration for if you didn't know it could do it, showing you something that maybe you could take that and use it in another way. So I'm going to show you how to use the @unit in conjunction with an if-then statement as well. And maybe you didn't even know that you could do if-then statements. So we're going to go through those kinds of things. So the first tip is discussing using CBR rows. So I've got an example of your row format, or the row definition here on the left-hand side and the column definition on the right-hand side. So in the row definition, you're seeing two lines that have CBR on them, where you're identifying a row that you want to be able to set as a denominator. So what this CBR code does is allows you, if you were to create a percentage calculation like you see over here on the right-hand side, we've got columns C and D are percentage columns. And essentially they are a percentage of something. So you're defining the something in this example, and you're essentially setting the denominator in your percent calculation. So on the first example up at the top, you've got sales as your net sales as your denominator. But then when you get to the expense section, you're setting the denominator as the total expenses. So when your percentages are calculating out, you're going to get a percent of revenue when you're dealing with everything down to the gross profit line, and you're going to get a percent of total expenses as soon as you hit that salary expense. Okay. The next tip that I wanted to talk to you about was essentially showing how to use a calculation. This example is showing a minority interest, but you can use this in so many different kinds of ways. But in this example, it's saying, all right, I need to take a percentage of a certain column and I only need to show it in certain ways. So this tip is actually going to combine being able to manipulate where you want things to actually show in a report. It's going to I'll show you how to use non-printing columns, how to create some eliminations. There's a lot of stuff in this one. But then also being able to create a calculation that only pulls for certain units. Okay, so in this example, we have 3 companies with a total. We've got an elimination column and then another column that takes the total less the eliminations. And down here we've got a minority interest that you'll notice is only showing in my total columns. Okay, and it's then going to be able to allow you to remove that minority interest piece so that your total at the bottom does not include that minority interest piece. So how you would do that is first by setting up in your report, in your row definition, an if-then statement that uses the at unit calculation. So this is using in conjunction with a tree, and it's saying when you get, for this unit, you want to be able to multiply a certain amount by something. If it's not that unit, then you don't show, it just is going to be 0, okay? Then you'll notice over here in the row definition also in the column restrictions, this is where you're telling it only to print in those certain columns, E and J. No, E and J actually represent those total columns that I showed you at the beginning. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the way the column is actually defined. So in this example, you can see I've got my 3 companies with my total, and I've got 3 different columns for my eliminations that are then totaling up. And you'll notice that I have non-printing columns for all of those eliminations so that I can actually just see the total of the eliminations and I'm not seeing them independently. Okay. Down here in my attribute filter is how I'm telling it what pieces of each of those companies are going to be the elimination pieces, what accounts include the elimination entries. So in column B, I'm using a tree to segregate off which branch I want to be included in that column. And then in my attribute filter, you can see I'm including which accounts I want to be included as part of the eliminations. Okay, so then over here in column I is where I'm actually adding all of those F, G, and H together. And column E is then taking the difference between my total in column E and H, or E and I, and it's going to show that. So you'll notice my column E and my column J are really the columns that are going to show as my totals, because F, G, and H are actually going to be eliminated. Okay, so back here on the row definition, you can see the E and J are the one that's going to be shown. So what it's doing is then will look like this. Okay, and I know I gave you a whole lot of information in that, and there's a lot of techniques, but half the battle, like I said, is knowing that you can actually do that. So if you have any questions on that, let me know and we can go through that a little bit more, but I wanted to at least show you how you can use all those things in combination to get the reports to look the way you want them to actually look. There's a lot of things that you can make these reports do so that when you run them, they just give you the results that you're looking for rather than to have to export these things out to Excel and then manipulate them manually every time. So we like being able to just push buttons and make reports work. And there's a lot of things you can do with calculations to make the reports do what you actually want them to do. The next tip is being able to essentially create an average column. Now, when you're creating an average, you may have multiple months in this and you need the denominator to change based on the time frame that you're actually running this report for. So if you were to run this in, say, March, you need to divide by 3 to get an average. But if you were to run this, say, in September, you would need to actually divide this by 9. So you can see here my 1s and 2, where I'm actually defining the formula in the base. The base basically is it uses the same way as when you're setting up an FD column and you tell it to use base, and it looks at your report date. So when you're doing a calc column and you put base there, it's identifying what the report period is based on your report date. And then when you use the period function, it uses whatever is defined in that period in this number 2 here. So periods is another way of creating a parameter. So when you use periods, it uses what you have as a base in your period attribute to be able to create that denominator. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is some cool columns and being able to set up some efficiencies. We're going to talk about creating a 12-month rolling in a single column, how to create weekly columns from a monthly bucket, how to add the account number into your report if you need to see that on a financial level. And the same thing with the row column. When you use the row column type, you're actually adding the row code from the report or the row definition. So the first thing we're going to talk about is using a rolling 12 in a single column. Now this allows you to be able to get essentially the monthly activity for the past 12 months in a single column. So by using your parameter of base minus 11 colon base, it allows you to essentially get 12 months in a single column. Now, if you were to run this and you were on a calendar year and you ran this for December, it essentially would give you January through December. If you ran this, let's say in June, it essentially would give you July through June, where July, August, September, October, November, December actually were representative of the information from the prior year. So using this kind of formula or period combination allows you to actually cross over fiscal years and get all of that information into one column. So this can be really helpful if you're on a fiscal year and you still need to get current year activity, on a calendar year into a single column. A lot of times banks ask for this kind of information. So essentially, this is what your report would look like when you generate this, where you actually have 12 months of activity in a single report. So if you were doing a P&L, like I said, and you were on a calendar or on a fiscal year and you needed it based on a calendar year, you could still get 12 months of data in a single column. All right, the next one is a weekly glance from a monthly bucket, okay? So what this is using is it's looking at your start and end dates down here in your attributes on your FD columns and allows you to fill those in. So if you were to fill them in as 1 to 7, 8 to 14, 15 to 21, 22 to 28, it's essentially taking your monthly bucket and it's looking at the transaction date on your journal entries and it's going to filter those in the appropriate column, okay? If you use numbers like that, 1 to 7, 8 to 14, it looks at how you have your fiscal period defined, and it's going to use the first day of your fiscal period. So if you were, say, like on a 445 or something like that, where the start of the month didn't really happen on the start of the month, let's say, say April 3rd, and was the start of your period, then day 1 would be April 3rd and day 7 would be April 10. So it does work in conjunction with the way that your general ledger is actually defining your fiscal periods. So you have options here that you can actually use days like this, or you can actually, if you double click on that start and end date, you can actually use specific dates. So I've had clients in the past need to be able to create a column that only goes through, like, say, June 15th, because we only need the transactions that happened through partway through the month. You can actually make it go only through certain dates, so that, like this was like if you got bought or you had, a transfer of ownership on a specific day, being able to take that monthly bucket and break it down. This weekly one gets used by one of my clients that's a grocery store, and they need to be able to take that monthly bucket and break it down into the various different weeks. Okay. All right, this next one is being able to control what you see in the report in terms of the account information. So there's actually a couple tips in here. One is being able to actually just use the column type of account, ACCT, so that you can force the account number to be on the financial level of your report. If you don't include the ACCT column, and you run the report to an account level, so you have that financial account level in your report, when you drill into the account, when you drill into a row, you'll still see the account number, but you wouldn't see it on a financial level. So sometimes, like when you're creating, like, say, a trial balance report and you've got all the accounts listed down on that financial level, you still want to see the account number. This would be a way of being able to do that. Okay, so the second tip with this is, by default, it's only going to show the account number. But if you change you go to your view and you go to dimension descriptions, then when you run the report, it will actually show what the name of the dimension was that was being defined as well. So that's something that you can toggle back on and off. And I've got all of that listed over here as to what all the steps are. Okay. So the next one deals with the same kind of thing, but now you're looking at the row code. So if you put ROW as your column type, then it's going to use this row code from your row definition, and it will actually put that row code in the financial level of your report. So that can be really handy when you've got a multi-page report and you're trying to work on formulas and you don't know what the row code is and you're trying to validate the formulas are working or whatever. If you put the row code in there, then you'd be able to look at the formula and see the report and see what the values are, and it can be helpful to be able to see what exactly lines are pulling and that sort of thing. So I use that all the time when I'm trying to troubleshoot things like that. All right, so next we're going to talk about some radical rows and being able to do that column placement or make a report, a line in the report, non-drillable. And the use of other dimensions inside your row definitions when you're actually coding reports. So being able to use account categories. Also being able to use the row modifiers. And any of you that's ever been in my other training classes, as we do like upgrades and we talk about new features, or maybe we have fill in the gap training, sometimes we kind of gloss over some of these things because they start being a little bit on a more advanced level of being able to write reports. So now here's your chance. I'm going to actually show you what those are used for. All right, so the first thing, think about like a tabular type of balance sheet or a tabular type of report where you want certain balances to be in one column and other balances to be in another column. So this is an example of an income statement where I want certain totals, or the account totals, to be in certain columns, and I want the grand totals to be in another column. So on my column setup over here, you'll notice that I have two columns that are set up exactly the same, where I have year to date and year to date. Okay, and they're exactly the same. But then in my column restriction and my row definition, I'm actually specifying which rows I want to show in which column. And over here you can see the example that I've got certain rows showing up in certain columns and other rows showing up in other columns. Okay, so that's kind of like a tabular, and it's allowing you to use that column restriction. So this is just a very simplistic example of being able to manipulate how things are showing on your report. But you can use this in so many different ways if you need to restrict which rows, which columns certain rows actually print in. So I've used this in lots of different examples of when I'm writing reports for people. If I say I only want certain percentages to show in certain columns, you don't have to do this on every single row, but it does allow you to restrict what you're actually going to pull into the report and where it actually displays. When you do something like this, you have to be very careful about which columns you're tying and connecting with which rows, because as soon as you start doing column restrictions, the column restrictions are using the column letters from the column definition. So as soon as you start doing this kind of thing, you're really kind of marrying the row and the column together, and it doesn't give you as much flexibility as being able to do that swapping out of your columns, because if you've got column letters listed over here, they may not be the same column letters in every single column definition that you've actually might want to use with this. So as soon as you start doing that, you may have to use multiple row definitions that may exactly be the same but have different column restrictions depending on what column definition you want to tie to it. So just to kind of get you thinking about that a little bit different. Okay, so I use this one a lot when we start talking about being able to drill into a report, running a report down to the account level or even to that transaction level, and being able to get that extra information into a report. Well, sometimes when you're creating a report, you don't need all that extra information for every single row. So this is an example of a balance sheet, and over here, we don't really want people to be able to drill into the net income number here. That's just going to be a lot of accounts. If you've got a lot of chart of accounts, you don't really want to pull that. So by using the print control in column G, you can actually suppress the row and account level account detail. So that means that all the rest of the rows would be drillable, but this one row would not be drillable. And you can do the same thing for a transaction level. So if you made it XT instead of XD, then you might be able, and you can use these in conjunction, like if you took this one off and you just put this one on, you'd still be able to drill into the account, but you wouldn't be able to drill into the transactions. So depending on how far you want them to be able to drill in the report, you can control it. Now, if you put it so they can't drill into the account, they would never be able to get to the transaction, because obviously you have to get to the account before you can get to the transaction. And if you're okay with them getting the account, but you don't want them to get to the transaction, you can actually do that in conjunction, okay? So another example might be maybe you've got a report that has salary information that you still want them to be able to drill into all the other lines. You just don't want them to be able to go into payroll information. That might be another example of, tying that row to an XD print control so that you can't drill into just specific rows. Okay. The next one is talking about using our link to our financial dimensions. Now, some of you have heard me talk about this when we've talked about using some of the sample reports or the default reports that come from Microsoft. And if you've never used any of the sample reports, if you open them up, it actually uses your account category. So this is a great way, now depending on if you've got your chart of accounts set up in a way that actually uses account category correctly. So on the account card in your ERP package, one of the required fields is the account category. Now with GP, it comes with a standard 48. You can actually set up additional ones. And I usually recommend people kind of glance over what those are and set those account categories up based on how you would actually set up a balance sheet or and an income statement, and create your account categories based on how you would do your groupings in those two reports. And once you set the account category up in your account, then you can use the account categories within your reports to be able to pull the accounts that are associated to that account category. The nice thing about using account category is it gives you the ability to add new accounts to your chart of account without having to do maintenance within your report. Okay, so you can use the account category there, and you can see when you drill into there that depending on what your segmentation is in your chart, you also have account category, and when you double click in there, you'll see all the account categories that you have defined in your ERP package. Okay. Same thing with dimension value sets. Again, this is part of being a part of your link to your financial dimension. And when you click on any of the dimensions, the dimension value sets are very, very similar to an account category, except for now you're defining those by segment. So you can create groupings of accounts, main accounts, groupings of just divisions, or groupings of, whatever your segments are, and you do them individually, and then you can mix and match them together. So maybe you have a set of main accounts that mean a certain thing, then you can tie them to a grouping of divisions, and it would do a cross combination of those two. It's kind of like doing an and statement when you're writing a query, or if you think back to geometry where you're creating the intersecting circles of in it, and anything that crosses between those intersecting is what's actually going to get pulled into that grouping. So this allows you to create something within Management Reporter that defines these things, and then these are global settings that you could then use in any of your other rows, or even in your columns, or even in trees. I've done this for people in trees as well, where you're doing groupings of certain departments together, so that anytime that gets changed, it gets changed wherever that gets used. So it's a very handy way of being able to group things together. And if you've got lots of reports that have a lot of cherry picking through the chart, so to speak, of what you actually need to include, it allows you to create those groupings and not have to do manual maintenance on every single row or every single column or every single tree. You do it in one place, and any place that that dimension value set is used, it allows you to update that very quickly. Okay. All right, so the last one in the rows is looking at that column I and being able to see either book codes, and that's going to show you the different quote unquote ledgers that you have within your company. So book codes refers back to either actual or budget, and then the account modifier allows you to change the time frame. Now keep in mind, we are on a row, so everything you're doing is going to be specific for a particular row in the row definition. So some places that I've seen this being used is, like, say you need to be able to pull the beginning balance of retained earnings or something on a particular row, even though the column that's associated to the report might be a year-to-date column. Okay, so that's an example of using an account modifier. Or maybe you need to see last month's ending balance in a particular row so that you can do some calculations or whatever. Okay, so that's an example of being able to use that account modifier to change what you're bringing in. Same thing with the book code, but now instead of pulling actual, maybe you want to pull budget. So a lot of times I give the example of being able to have actual on one line and budget on another row. So rather than seeing that budget versus actual on a column by column, side by side basis, you're able to see that on a row by row basis. Okay. Keep it clean formatting tricks. So we're going to talk about being able to use description format codes to clean up what actually gets displayed in a report and to suppress certain rows in certain data types. We're going to talk about the account detail option and being able to, what you can see with being able to drill down. We're going to talk about a couple other options for conditional printing and the report options to actually suppress rows that don't have amounts. I get this question all the time. And especially if you've inherited reports and you didn't realize that this option was available. So we're gonna talk about what that option actually gives you. All right, so the first one is using your format code, the DES line, and looking at what you're actually seeing. Oops, going back one. Here in column D, okay? So what you're doing, and you'll notice here this says related formulas, rows, and units. So what you're doing is you're relating this description to another row. So in this case, if we wanted to set up our report that only the rows that actually have values display, but we've got these blank underlines in our report, or blank, not underlines, but blank spaces between the rows. Well, if column or row 80 doesn't display because we had no sales for this division, let's say, then we don't need this underline or this blank row to display either. So what we're doing is we're relating the row to the row above it. And the same thing here for cost of goods sold, and the same thing here for gross margin. That if any of these rows were 0 for any reason, that these blank rows don't display either. So you can kind of think of this, take this one step further, and you've got other things that are displaying, and you've got a really long report, and let's say you're running this with a tree that has division or department on it, and some departments have things and some departments don't have things. Well, you want the report to shrink up and only show you the things that are relevant for that line. This kind of talks, this is in conjunction with a tip that I'm going to show you. I think the next 2 tips that's going to show you, but this allows you to clean up some of these blank lines that might show up by relating them. So on the report settings tab of your report definition, this tip is talking about how to clean up what you see when you drill down into the account level report. And I've seen this happen numerous times, that when you drill into it, you don't see the account code. So what you're going to do is on this account and transaction detail, you want to make sure that, that your display account code or dimensions is checked or unchecked if when you drill into it, you don't want to see the account code listed. This option actually will allow you to do that, okay? All right, so this is using conditional print options on a column level. So I showed you how you could do some conditional printing for individual rows by using like that XD, some options in that XD command, or, in the print control and the row definition. This is on a column level. So what this is allowing you to do is to only have columns print based on a time frame. So this is an example of a quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and depending on, so you got quarter 1 here, quarter 2 here, quarter 3, quarter 4, and we've got a print control here that says print this period only if it's less than or equal to the base. Well, it's looking at the period here, and the base is going to be our report date. So our period is 1, and depending on what the report date was is going to determine whether these columns will actually display or not. Okay, so this is a way of being able to have only one column, or January display. If you ran this report in February, January, column C, D, all of these columns would not display because they are not greater than or equal to the base period of the report. And if you were to run this in period 2 and 3, you know how you would actually get this to work. Okay, so using your print control allows you to have things turn on and off in your column based on what your report date is. All right, the next one is looking at, again, the settings tab, and we were talking about when you generate a report, do you want the rows that do not have a balance to actually show in the report? And on the settings tab, if you go to display rows with no amounts, if you leave that unchecked, then if you've got a report that has 20 rows in it, and the row definition has 20 rows in it, but let's say there was a zero balance in 5 of those rows, you can make those rows disappear so that they don't show on the report by checking that or leaving this option unchecked. All right, the World Wide Web Viewer. I didn't know you could do that. This is going to talk about things that you can do inside the web viewer. We're going to talk about being able to do things side by side, using the go-to command, using the show command, and then how you can download reports. And what what happens when you do it with a report group. Okay, so some of you I know are using report groups and may not realize that this option is actually available. So we're going to talk about that. So this is just a quick web view reference. When you click on the option over here, this is going to allow you to see the tree that was attached to this report. So if you ran this by division or department tree, clicking on the reporting tree would then show you each of those divisions, and then you could click on each of those divisions provided you had access to them and change what you actually saw in the report. The report options allows you to rerun this report inside this screen for a different date range. Now there's a bunch of cool things that happens with that, because if you just needed to see a refreshed version of the report and you don't want to mess up the library and add extra versions to the library, running this way doesn't add any versions to your library. And anybody that wants to know more about the library and how it works, we do have other webinars that we've already done that kind of go into a lot more detail about that kind of topic. You can check out our YouTube page and check out the topic on those. If you want to have a discussion about that, please let me know, and I would be happy to discuss that with anybody. But using this report option allows you to essentially regenerate this report for a different time frame. The go-to button allows you to jump through the report, okay? And I'm going to show you that in a little bit more detail. This is just a reference guide. The show button allows you to see where the charts, the comments, the headers, and the footers, and then also get a summary view of the report. I'm going to show you that in a little bit more detail as well. Being able to print the report, whether it be to an XPS file or a PDF file, depending on what your printer settings are, or if you just want to print it to a printer, that option allows you to do that. And then the download is where you can actually export this to Excel, or allows you to then open this report in the report viewer rather than the web viewer. And again, if there's any further discussion that anybody wants to have on that, I would be happy to tell you. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what the web view actually look like. Okay, so when you run a report, it's going to open it in the web viewer, and it's going to open it in a bunch of tabs going across the page. Well, those are just tabs. Those are just, you can pull those out, and using the Windows Snap feature allows you to then put them side by side. Or if you wanted to be able to throw one version on one monitor or another on another monitor, so you can look at them a little bit more closely side by side on different monitors. Those are just tabs that are open in the same web view. You can just pull them out. Okay, so if you click on the Go To button, you can actually keep going ahead too quickly. It allows you to jump through the report. Now, this is not super impressive if you only have a one-page report, but if you've got a 3 or 4 page report, the Go To option allows you to jump to the TOT lines or the description lines that are set up in the row definition that's being used with this report definition. Okay, so that can be a nice way of kind of jumping through pages or back up, and if you're trying to find something specific, you know, you can scroll through it that way. This is a cool option that not a lot of people see or use all the time, but if you go to your show and then you click on your summary lines, you can take a really detailed report like this and make it look like this, where it only shows you, again, those TOT lines and the description lines. So it's a nice way of being able to get a quick snapshot glance of just subtotals. All right, so with the report groups, this allows you to download to Excel, and it would take all of the reports that were part of that report group, and you'll notice that it puts them all in a single Excel workbook, and every tab represents a different report. Now, depending on how you wrote the report or how you generated the report will determine whether you get the account and the financial level and or the transaction level, or if you just get the financial level. So the report group, the way you set that up, is going to determine when you export that and it puts it all in one workbook, how much goes into the workbook. So that's a really cool feature if you're trying to create like a monthly packet, so to speak, to give to people, is being able to use that report group, and then when you generate it, to be able to export that to Excel and have it put it all in a single workbook. All right, so the next couple, and I think I need to start speeding up here because I think I'm going to start running out of time, is making it mine. And we're going to talk about using font styles, hiding stuff, using link location to generate reports, where you want to put them in the library, and then in that report group, how you can do the same thing and override where things are actually going in your report. So the first tip on this is talking about font styles. So if you go to formatting and font styles, it allows you to create the font styles that you see over here. These are great for setting up some consistency in your reporting. When you're creating your reports, you can create font styles so that if you had a row total, it always looks like this, or if you had a row description, it looks like this, or we always want column headers to look like this. You can create those font styles so that you can keep that consistency without having to spend your life, you know, doing the formatting section over here. The navigation pane. Real estate is prime everywhere, right? Location, location, location. What this allows you to do is to give more room on your workstation to actually look at what you're looking at. So this is the navigation pane right here. And if you use your Alt plus F1, or you can go to the view navigation pane, and it will actually hide this pane so that you can just see what it is that you're actually looking on. Now you can use this hide navigation pane in Report Designer and in Report Viewer. If you want to hide the navigation pane there so you can see more of the report that has been generated, you'd be able to do that in the Report Drill Down Viewer as well. All right, so default report location. So we've talked about this in other webinars where every time you generate a report, it puts it somewhere, right? It's going to put it in the Management Reporter library. Again, I've got a webinar that talks about this in greater detail. What this is talking about is when you're using a report group, how you can determine where it goes in the library for the entire report group rather than having to do this on a report by report basis. So lots of options in the report definition itself. You can choose here. So this is an example of the report definition, and you can click on the drop down. Now in the report group, you've got the group distribution tab that again, you can choose the location of the library, or if you want to change on a report by report basis in the report group, you can choose the report distribution tab, and then you have options for choosing where, if you want to override the report location and use the group, or if you want to actually put the reports in a separate place than the group distribution. And I know that might be confusing for those that are not necessarily using groups right now, but if you have questions about that, let me know and we can talk about that a little bit more. But essentially the gist of this was to say that you've got multiple places that can define where a report's going to go in the library, either on a report or on a group basis. You can choose where those reports are actually going to go. Now, I'm not sure if we actually have anybody from the AX or the D365 group that are on here. This is not an option for you, so you can ignore this completely. You don't have any, you can't change where your stuff goes in the library. So if you're wondering about that, this is not something that can be changed if you're using D365. Actually, it's just D365. If you're using AX, you can, but if it's D365, you cannot. All right. This is the report group overrides to get to the data that you want. Changing the company or changing the report date the report group allows you to change what the individual reports would say and allow all the reports to run for a specific date or for a specific time. Now, when you're using a report group, you have to be careful that the reports that are in there either are using a tree, or if they're not using a tree and you say override the company, whatever the original company that was set up on the report will be overridden by changing your company name here. So let's say you had a group of, say you have 3 reports here that were not using a tree, but you needed to be able to run these for 6 different companies. If you set up a report group that had the 3 reports in here, when you came in to the report group, you could tell it to override the company that were on the individual reports. And if you click on the drop down here, you can choose to run these reports for the other companies. Just be careful that you're not mixing and matching reports that you had previously set up that were already set up for specific companies, because all those reports would then run for whatever company was here if they were not using a tree. So hopefully I didn't confuse that. But these options allow you to override what the default settings were on an individual report. So report group can get used in multiple different ways. And if you have questions on how to actually get those report groups to work the way you want, I would be happy to discuss those with you. All right, so we're going to talk head to toe next. And basically, we're going to start talking about things that you can do with headers and footers in your reports by using some of the auto text and unit descriptions, by adding text fields that have come from maybe a reporting tree, how to get rid of that pesky day of the week in your header so it doesn't say Tuesday, March 31st, 2010. I don't even know if it's Tuesday, but I'm just making up words, but we're trying to get rid of that Tuesday out of our heading, right? And then how to show our headers and footers in the web viewer. So the first one is we're looking at the headers and footers tab of our report definition and being able to add the auto text of at unit description. Where that at unit description comes from is within your tree, that column C, the unit description. So when you add that to your header of your report, it's going to allow you to run a report with a tree and have which piece of the tree be displayed at the top of the report. So you can see an example here. There's my summary of all units at the top of my report, and it's pulling from my tree. So if you've got your trees that are created and you don't necessarily have descriptions in this column C, if you update those and then you add unit description in your report header, you can get those display on your report. All right, using text fields in a reporting tree. So a lot of people don't realize that these are actually over here, but if you scroll all the way to the right and you click on column N, you have an additional 10 fields of text that you can associate to every row of a tree. So for example, maybe you wanted to be able to put the department manager's name on the report. If you put the department manager in the text field 1 of every row of this tree, then when you come over to maybe your footers, your option down here on your unit description on your auto text is text fields from the reporting tree, and you can pull any one of those 10. So you have to be consistent as to like which field you put it in on every row, but then you can add that text to your report. So then when you generate your report, it'll actually put that name in the footer. All right, getting rid of the Tuesday. Now, there's 2 different places that this needs to be done in order for this not to show up. If you're running the reports to the report viewer, this would be a local setting on your own machine. Is the per user setting that you actually need to change the long date in your regions, in your date format on your computer. So if you go to regions and language, you can change. This screen is probably changed for Windows 10 now, but that will actually remove that day of the week. If you're using the web viewer, this gets a little different. You actually have to log in as the process service user on the machine that's running the configuration console, because that's going to control what the settings, the date settings are when you're looking at it through the web viewer. So even though you might have changed that setting on your machine, when you use the web viewer, it's using the service account, the process service account user, it's using their default settings. So you may need to get your IT involved on this one so that they can log in as that process, that service account, and change the dating for that user. Okay, so there's 2 different ways that, and then you need to restart your MR services so like that kicks into effect. If you have questions on that, let me know. I'd be happy to walk somebody through that. All right, so sometimes when you're looking at a report in the web viewer, you don't see the headers. You need to go down to your show button and then do headers and footers, and then it will actually show those headers and footers. All right. Oh, and I'm running completely out of time, and I'm only on tip 29. Alexis, I'm not sure what you want me. I still have probably another 10 tips to go through.
I think we can go ahead. Let's give it another 10 minutes and see how far we can get through it.
Okay. All right, for the need for, I told you 45 minutes-ish, right? And my ish is really
Stay
extending.
tuned.
Exactly. All right, need for speed. We're going to talk about, these ones should go pretty quick. Changing the company, which company you're in at the status bar, using the F3 for drop downs, doing find and replace and renumbering rows. This one's really quick when you don't have anything open, if you've got all your building blocks closed. Just like when you're in your ERP package, if you double click on the company at the bottom, it'll pull up your company screen, and you can change and set it as a new company as default. When you're in the actually anywhere there might be a drop down, if you want to stay in your keyboard without having to go back into the mouse to double click on the ellipse, if you hit your F3 key, it will bring the drop down. This is a universal command that works actually anywhere. So if you were in Excel or you were on a web page, F3 will open a drop down box. Okay. On your edit menu, you have a find and replace option. So that can be really handy. Like I use the find and replace all the time. Like say you're in a row definition and you're looking to see if you used an account in the row. You could actually do a find and then type in the account number and it will take you to wherever the account might be in your row definition. Maybe you need to do find and replace. It works exactly the same way that it would in Word or Excel at doing a find and replace. But a lot of times people don't even realize that you can actually do find and replace in Management Reporter. So I like to point that out. The other thing is being able to renumber rows. If you go to Edit to renumber rows, let's say you need to insert a bunch of rows into your row definition and it leaves you with blank row codes because you don't have enough space to insert them. You can go to Edit, renumber rows, and it will renumber your rows based on a formula you define. So if you say increment it at 30, it'll put 30 spaces in between. As long as your formulas are using valid row codes, it will update all your formulas. So you will not lose, you won't have to go back and change all your formulas. Those will automatically get updated as long as it had valid row codes to begin with, okay? All right, hodgepodge. We're gonna talk about descriptions and changing the descriptions on your building blocks and what that actually means and where you can use that. How you can print currency symbols in a row, auto fit, just even knowing that that's an option, and then one that is not used, I think, as frequently as it probably should be, is being able to open a previously generated report. All right, so when you have a building block open, whether it be a report, a row, a column, or tree, you have a description line down here. Okay, so I use this probably most frequently when I'm looking at a report definition. If you go to File Properties, you can actually change the description there. Now, if you make that something that is identifiable for this report, you can use an auto text of @report description in your report header. So when you go to your headers and footers, you can say @report description, and you can essentially use the description that you just put on your report definition as a title in your report. So if you needed to say, income statement 12-month trend, rather than having to go to the header and type that in, if you would put that as a description on your report and you put @report description, it would automatically put whatever description you had from there as your title. This is really kind of handy when you do a lot of file save as, so that the title in your report always gets updated when you create a new report, as long as you update the description. If you do a file save as, you can change the description on the fly, but after you've already have something saved, you have to do file properties to get back to that description to change the description. All right. The next one is being able to force a currency symbol. So formatting is controlled by the column definition. So if you want your numbers to be formatted in a certain way in a column, you would usually do that on the column description or the column definition. However, sometimes you don't want to format so that every single row would actually have a currency symbol. You only want to display them periodically throughout the report just to identify what currency this is in. So by using the print control on the row definition, you can force currency symbols even though the column wasn't designed to actually have currency displayed. Okay, so you can use that CS command on a particular row so that you can pick and choose where you want those currency symbols actually to be displayed. Autofit is an option to be able to choose your column width. So if you've ever run a report and you get the pound signs when you're looking at something because it's not wide enough, you can use autofit to make it, the column always fit. I caution people with autofit, especially in descriptions, because if you've got a really wide description, then you may not necessarily want 150 characters to be automatically, displayed that wide. So a lot of times I won't necessarily use autofit on a description. If I'm just doing a month of and year to date, autofit would be perfect. If you're doing a 12-month trend, again, you might not want to use autofit if you want all your columns to be the same width. Then you might need to be a little bit more picky about how wide you want each of those columns to actually display, so you don't get one that's like 20 characters and one that's only like 5, All right, so there's a button just next to the generate button that just to the left that if you hover over it, it will actually tell you the last time that you generated a particular report. If you click on that, it will actually open the report. I use this all the time when I'm running something, and let's say I generate a report and all of a sudden, and then I close it and I'm like, oh, I want to look at it again. I don't have to regenerate it to see the report. I can click on that button and it will open the last time I generated it. Now, depending on how many people are actually generating reports, keep in mind it may not be the last time you generated the report. So if you've got 3 or 4 people that all might be generating the same report, just be cognizant of the fact that it might be somebody else's time that they generated, okay? But it will tell you the last time it was generated. All right, I think we're in our last section. Being able to do sorting, indenting, negative numbers, and sorting by the natural account. So there's 2 different sortings that are going to go on here, and I'm going to explain both of those. The first one is within a report. And this one I tend to skip over, and I kind of tell people, oh, you can read up on this on the F1. But what this allows you to do is essentially, let's say you had a report that had a whole bunch of expense accounts listed, and you wanted to be able to sort those expenses from high to low or low to high, okay? So that as you generated the report, if you've got 15 line items there, whatever the highest expense is always going to be at the top. You can use your format code here, and it's going to identify, you can use the sort code, and then you tell it which rows that you're identifying that you want to sort, and then you tell what column you want it to sort on. So then that range of rows will be sorted based on that particular column. And then you can also do descending if you wanted to. So there's like 3 or 4 different sort options that allow you to take a report so that you don't have to keep going in there and coding it. Oh, I want this one on top, I want this one on top. You just code the lines you want and then you tell it to sort it. All right, the indent option is really kind of cool to make things appear, having reports that have good numbers is important, but after you know that the numbers are good, having a nice presentation of report is nice as well. So using your indent option, you can actually push things over without having to, like if anybody that came over from FRX used to spend your life at that indent, the space bar hitting indent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to like get those to move over. Now you have options to be able to just highlight a group of rows that you want to indent and scooch those over, just like you can either in Excel or Word. I get asked this one a lot, that when they want to run a report, they want to see the negative numbers in red. So again, this is on the Settings tab. And you're just going to say display negative numbers in red, so that when you generate a report, anything that's negative will actually show up in red. All right, and you guys made it to the end. Oh my gosh, we're on the last tip. All right, sorting by the natural or the main account. So when you drill into, say you have a financial level and you drill into a row and you want to actually see the accounts, sometimes it's nice to have them sorted by the natural or the main account. So if you go to your account transaction detail tab, you can sort by natural and main account. Now keep in mind, it's going to sort it based on whatever the first column is displayed. So if you have budget versus actual, and you have certain accounts that don't have budget to it, it's going to sort by that budget first. You might want to swap those and put actual first if you've got more accounts that have information in them. Okay. All right. We made it to the end. And I know I like totally blew past my 45 minutes. I am so sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay, Annette. Okay, so we have a few questions here if you guys want to stay on. So we have one here on the reports. So can the consolidating report pull company column data from separate GP databases?
Yes. Yes, the tree allows you to pull from separate GP databases. You would use a tree, and that was exactly that first one I showed you with the minority interest. Those were actually pulling from 3 different GP company databases.
Okay, great. Is there a spell check function available when creating or modifying a report?
Unfortunately, there is not a spell check option. However, there is an Excel and Word, and you can copy and paste from Excel. I usually do Excel because it's a little bit easier. So what I usually will do is I'll paste it all into Excel. I'll spell check it, and then copy it into Excel, spell check it, and then paste it back into my row definition. So I can use the spell checker in Excel.
We just got another one here. How can I resave an existing report to play with these new tips?
Okay, so keep in mind when you're saving a report that it's made up of building blocks. So it could be made up of a row, a column, and or a tree. So if you're going to play with all of these and you want to make changes to your row, just because you did a file save as on the report definition doesn't mean that you're using a different row definition. So you may need to do a file save as on the row, on the column, and the tree, and then on the report, and then make the report point to those new versions of the row, the column, and the tree if you don't want to mess up the original.
Great. And how do you get to the web viewer?
Okay, so by default, when you first install it, it's going to actually put and I don't think I have it actually open, otherwise I'd log in and I show it to you. Actually, I can do this. Here, I'm gonna exit out of this, maybe. I am going to do this really quick. If you go to Tools, Options, that's the way that you can actually change it. Hang on a second. I'm not very good at multitasking. I can't talk and type at the same time. All right. We're going to go to, I have pictures of it right here. Nope, not that one. Find it. This one right here. Okay, so if you go to Tools and then Options, it says Use Management Report View as a default viewer. If that's deselected, it will use the web viewer. So when you generate a report, as long as your Tools, Options, and then this is not checked, it will actually take you to the web viewer versus the desktop viewer or the report viewer, whatever you want to call it.
And what is the difference between an attribute filter and a dimension filter?
The dimension filter is going to give you your segments, just like if you were in a row, where when you're on the attribute filter, it's looking at the attributes of a journal entry and allows you to filter for just certain attributes of a journal entry. So say you wanted to pull one of the attributes might be originating master ID. If you wanted to be able to filter a column based on certain vendor IDs, you could do that. Or maybe you wanted to do it based on certain journal types, you could do that.
Great. And one last question here. When putting account ACCT on a column, can you get just a segment of the full account?
It's going to essentially what it's going to give you is whatever is defined. It says account, but really what it's going to give you is whatever is defined in the row definition until you drill down to the account level, and then you will always get the full account code. So if you only use the main account in the row definition, you'll only get the main account. But when you drill into it, you'll get the full account. If you define the row definition with a full account code, then when you, on the financial level, you'll get the full account code. So it's all in based on how you have the row definition defined as to how much of the account you're actually going to get.
All right, great. If there are no additional questions here, I would like to thank you all for attending today's presentation. Thank you so much, Annette, for giving us such a great overview of GP Management Reporter tips and tricks. You will also all see a follow-up email with a link to this recording and a short 3-question survey within an hour of this broadcast. If you have any additional questions replying to this email, we can get you directly in touch with Annette here. And please be sure to fill out the survey. And thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.